Good morning, Don't Unfriend Me Nation. What are we doing? Well, we're going to do a show. And this one, I don't mean to have a smile on my face because, tragic news is not supposed to be funny, and it's not. But I was editing one of the clips for the show, and there's just a funny situation that I found at the end. So, in the worst cases, in the worst situations, you can find some sort of levity. If you can, grab a hold of that because there's too much doom and gloom in the world, and this isn't much better. There was a interesting thing that happened in Virginia, Washington, D.C., Tennessee, all over, but mainly in Virginia, is that there was a very loud, what people thought was an explosion yesterday afternoon while doing various things. Several Ring doorbell cameras got a hold of this. There was some live video, and of course, everyone has a phone in their hand and using the camera nowadays, but it was an interesting situation. I've got a clip for you here. We'll watch this first, and I'll explain what's happening. This is a couple who they're recording. Well, actually, the wife is sitting there watching the husband, and he is playing harmonica and guitar. And it's just watch it and watch their reaction, and I'll explain what they're hearing as you watch this. So the reason I say it's funny, first of all, that is Irish Eyes 28. They have like 40 followers on hers, and his is Travis Against, and then he didn't finish his statement. This guy has like 18 followers, obviously. I love I love the 3-step progression chord where he's like, yeah, pulling off like Eddie Van Halen. I mean, just watch his pull off here and his little jerk in the body. That was so difficult to do those 3 little pull-offs. But here's the thing. I don't mean to make fun of the guy. What's interesting is that when I went on his Twitter page, I was like, okay, well, why doesn't this guy have a ton of followers? And then it occurred to me the reason why is probably because he's the literal mastodon. And it says, I do not tweet, do not follow me. Well, that would explain. He follows 306 people. But he asked not to be followed. But the interesting thing is when I was on his page, and this has to do with the sound that you heard, this pulled up. It was Ditto Games is promoting an F-18, obviously a video game, a flight simulator, and that's apropos considering that this is where the bad news comes from. And if we take a listen to it, what was it? It wasn't an explosion. It wasn't a car bomb or anything like that. It was actually a sonic boom from F-16s. So when I put this together and started writing, I had a bunch of different information. A lot of people were asking me, what's going on? Did they shoot down a plane? Was this another 9/11? And I'm like, just relax. So I went on Flight Tracker, a few other things, took a look, and this is what we found. There's probably a couple hundred articles about this on the internet and news sources. So this is filtered through a friend of mine in the FAA, and also a couple of military folks where they scrambled the F-16s from, and then also the news that you see readily available on Google. So here it is. In the D.C. region, fighter aircraft responded to an unresponsive pilot flying a Cessna, and it resulted in a sonic boom that reverberated across the area. Now, this was over Virginia, over my home. I've got a video of this, which you might find interesting, that kind of lays it all out. And needless to say, this will show you the flight path of the plane, and I'll kind of explain it while I read it so everyone can kind of understand what happened. It prompted officials to place the U.S. Capitol on alert on Sunday afternoon. Now, anything that flies through Washington, D.C. airspace, this red ring you see as the plane approaches that, is going to have authorization to fly through the area. And if it doesn't, and if it's on that trajectory and it does not change course, it will be warned unless it has access. Even if you fly a drone or single engine aircraft, you're asking for it, and the Air National Guard or responsive team will go ahead and launch fighters. You'll see F-35s over the Washington, D.C. airspace, or F-16s from time to time navigating the airspace, especially when there's a heightened level of security. NORAD, which is, if you don't know, the North American Aerospace Defense Command Center, deployed F-16s, 2 of them, on an intercept course for this Learjet, which was reported by the FAA to have 4 people on board. The Cessna later crashed in a mountainous region and in the terrain that you're specifically is a state park near Montebello, Virginia. And interesting enough, it flies right over my house. The trajectory of this right about now is going over my home. And then you see where it stops is where the crash took place. I can tell you during that time I was home, was outside, throwing the ball with E, and in no way, shape, or form did I hear an explosion or hear anything that would have been indicative of an interceptor or missiles being fired or a secondary explosion in any way, shape, or form. Not that I was necessarily close enough to hear that, but I didn't hear the sonic boom as well, which doesn't surprise me because they obviously were slowing down at that point. But state and local law enforcement reached the crash site on foot just before 8 p.m. after an extensive search in the Staunton Blue Ridgeway Parkway area. The interesting thing is Virginia State Policeman spokesperson Corinne Geller confirmed that no survivors were found. And the FAA and the National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, are obviously conducting investigations into the incident, looking at the black box and looking at what could possibly have happened. I've got my own thesis on what did happen. Startled residents in the region, as you saw in that video, took to social media to report hearing a loud explosion caused by the sonic boom. Now, this is obviously something that happens. You can create sonic booms. Anytime the speed of sound is breached, you're going to have some sort of secondary seismic event. You're also going to hear something from an auditory standpoint. No other than living next to Air Force bases my whole life and naval bases, we heard sonic booms all the time, but it's not something you readily hear, and authorization has to happen, especially in residential areas. If you're flying at a certain altitude, you're going to hear that sonic boom. You have to get permission to do so. The incident led to a tweet from D.C. Homeland Security and Emergency Management, and they stated that there was no threat at the time despite reports of the loud boom. Maryland officials revealed that the authorized Defense Department plane responsible for the boom was from Joint Base Andrews, where President Biden was playing golf with his brother, if you believe the long shots, and his swing is actually that of Joe Biden. Conspiracy theorists are saying that wasn't Joe Biden, it was his clone, but I don't listen to those people. We're doing the news. President Biden was briefed on the situation, and then he said, hey, watch this swing right after. No, that was George Bush. I'm just kidding. And the White House confirmed that the sound resulting from the authorized DoD aircraft was faint at Joint Base Andrews. U.S. Secret Service stated that the incident had no impact on its operations in any way, shape, or form. NORAD reported shortly after in an email statement that I received that the civilian aircraft was intercepted around 3:20 p.m. Eastern. The NORAD aircraft was authorized to travel at supersonic speeds, potentially causing the sonic boom heard by the residents. Flares were also deployed by the NORAD aircraft to draw attention from the unresponsive pilot. Now, people may be wondering, why would you do flares? Well, they're going to obviously do anything they could if that person's asleep at the wheel, so to speak. Obviously, there was absolutely no cognitive recognition or any sign that the pilot was aware or anyone on board was aware of the signal flares or of the F-16's presence. And trust me, if you're being shadowed by a couple of F-16s, you're going to know it. Despite efforts to establish contact, like I said, the pilot remained unresponsive until the Cessna crashed near the George Washington National Forest, Virginia. Now, conspiracy theorists are like, of course it landed in a national forest. Of course. So it's government controlled. Of course they shot this thing down. No, listen to me. If they were going to shoot it down, it would have been shot down way before this. They saw the trajectory. They lost this thing in New York. It was supposed to go to Manhattan Island. It left from Tennessee. It was registered to a gentleman in Florida. His granddaughter and his daughter were on the plane. It's very, very sad. It's tragic. 4 lives are lost here. Let's keep this in perspective. Going down in the national forest across the United States, you have a better chance of hitting a national forest than you don't. Look at some of the sizes of these forests. And obviously, it ran out of fuel at that point. I'll explain why they were unresponsive, at least in my estimation, and what we're probably going to find. U.S. Capitol Police collaborated with federal partners to monitor the unresponsive pilot near the National Capital Region. The U.S. Capitol complex was placed on an elevated alert until the airplane left the area. That's very, very important to understand, is that once it encroaches upon that red circle, there is an alert. We scramble, and 9/11 has a lot to do with this. The FAA and NTSB are working together to determine the cause of the crash of the Cessna Citation 560. Remember, it's not a single-engine aircraft. It's a Learjet. And it was bound for Long Island, New York, like I said, after departing Elizabethton, Tennessee. The NTSB will request radar data, weather information, and maintenance records for their investigation. It's all right here. You can have it. Just go ahead and knock on my door. I got it for you on Flight Tracker. The sonic boom is similar to thunder, and it's an impulsive noise caused by an object moving faster than the speed of sound, similar to what happens with a gun and a bullet. Approximately 750 miles per hour at sea level, according to the U.S. Air Force. While sonic booms can shatter glass, the threat to communities is relatively small and low. Like I said, the time that I've also heard it is when they were detonating a building about 3 miles from my house at 6 a.m. They went ahead and pulled the trigger and fired that thing off. My entire house shook, and it was much larger than they anticipated, and I'm surprised I didn't lose a couple windows. It was that big of an explosion. And this building was an old energy and oil distillery, and it was massive. I think it was like 7 or 8 stories and probably 4 or 5 Home Depots large. So they had to blow that thing up to smithereens, and that's exactly what they did. So the whole point is you can hear, these loud concussive explosions on several different things, and most of the time when you hear it, it's a firework or someone is setting off a small explosion, or it's a firearm. This is much different than that, as you heard from the guitar playing harmonica player simultaneously. That takes some talent to say, not just do. His reaction and hers, where she's like, "Oh, Charles," was, and I don't know what she's in the shot for, but whatever. Obviously, it's startling, and most people would react that way. I would have hit the deck, got my gun, but this guy had his guitar and harmonica. The unresponsive aircraft incidents are relatively rare compared to the number of overall flights in the world and in the United States. I wanted to get you some data on this. So you're like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to fly tomorrow. Aircraft are designed with multiple safety features and communication systems to prevent and address such situations. Pilots are trained to maintain communication with air traffic control and follow protocols to ensure the safety of their flights at all times. And it's ingrained. In the case of unresponsive aircraft, it's important to note that each incident is unique and can have different causes. Some incidents may be due to technical malfunctions, pilot incapacitation, communication failures, or other factors. Aviation authorities and organizations continually work to enhance safety and measures and protocols to minimize such incidents, obviously. According to the National Transportation Safety Board, the United States experiences an average of about 1,000 civil accidents each year, which includes both fatal and non-fatal accidents. However, it's important to note that not all of these accidents involve commercial airliners. The majority of the accidents involve smaller general aviation aircraft, such as private planes and smaller charter flights, as we see here. Now, this was a Cessna Citation, and most think, like I said, that's a single-engine prop that most associate with the Cessna name. This wasn't that. This is a small private Learjet, so onboard systems and flight controls are very different than a Cessna and more robust to keep aircraft in the air, for sure. After doing some digging, I found that the flight was registered out of Encore Motors of Melbourne, Florida. More than likely, this would be a case of hypoxia, where the mix of oxygen is too low in the cabin, and there is a slight tingling and euphoria that happens posthumously or before the event. If you take a look at the aircraft at this point, they knew in Manhattan that this thing was off course. Now, people wonder, why did it turn around? I mean, obviously, Washington, D.C., NORAD, SATCOM, they're all going to look at this and they're going to flip out. They're going to be like, wait a second, this thing's a trajectory on us. So they were watching it. Obviously, you're not going to shoot that thing over a densely populated area. I think to get from New York to Washington, D.C. is about probably a 3-hour drive. It's probably going to take them, I can't do the math in my head that fast, but let's just assume it's a little bit over 200 miles. It's going to be a very, very quick trip. Probably up, hit out lower altitude, mid altitude, and then come back down. It's just a quick hop. But the point is that once that turned around, they could assume a couple of things happen. Most, from my understanding from the FAA and a pilot friend of mine, said that if you miss your where you depart from and then your arrival destination with automatic pilot, because all this is done by computers. These guys aren't holding the yoke the whole time and holding the stick. They literally let this thing fly itself, is that the approach and everything is done by computers, and then the final landing is usually manual by most pilots, is that if it misses its approach, it will go back to, with the pilot's instruction, to go back and loop around and do it again. However, if there is no response on the controls, in any way, shape, or form, its default is to get out of airspace and go back to home. At least that's my understanding. Whether somebody handled that inside the cockpit, whether someone tried to get in, I have no idea. We will find this out from the flight data. We'll know every key that was punched over what minute, what time, how fast, what altitude, but you can see that there was no change in altitude here. The speed fluctuated, which is the computer making those adjustments based upon air conditions, turbulence, all that type of things. And then obviously whether your speed's going to go up and down, depending upon what you're looking at. They were running around 30,000 feet, 36,000 feet in between there for most of the flight. But as you can see for its approach here, it's coming in, it enters Washington, D.C. At no time is it obviously struck or taken out. I think at this point, there was kind of a wait and stay type of situation. They were at high altitude. They weren't descending. I will be honest with you. If this thing would have started descending before it hit that red circle, that thing would have been shot out of the sky, guaranteed. Over Delaware, they would have struck it. But it's not going to sit at 30,000 feet and they're going to pull the engine and then it's going to crash on top of the White House. That's not the way it works. So if this thing would have started descending, they would have shot it out of the sky. They didn't. They let it go through Washington airspace, obviously. The F-16s were scrambled long before that. They guided it through. They watched it come through. They knew it was unresponsive, and they let it go ahead and run its course. Now, if eventually at some point this thing would have kept doing its racetrack back and forth in its flight pattern, and they wanted to make sure, A, that it didn't fall over a populated area. Now, is it possible that these 16s fired upon this aircraft and shot it down over a national forest? Sure, it's possible. But once again, if these people were all suffering from apoxia and they were not able to be coherent, and that's essentially what happens, is you get a slight tingling and then it's euphoric, and then people on the plane would black out and be completely unresponsive. More than likely, this thing ran out of fuel. It's a small liner. It wasn't probably fueled to the max. It's going from Tennessee to a hop to New York. It went essentially one and a half times its overall distance, which would make sense for its reserve fuel. So it has a chance to kind of, if it needs to, taxi around the airport a couple times. If there's a backup or there's a delay for weather, it'll have reserve fuel to get back to at least to another airport and divert. Going halfway from original route makes sense. So more than likely ran out of fuel. Excuse me. If not, they did shoot it down. We're not gonna know that. They're not gonna go ahead and announce that. But probably the right thing to do is to shoot it over a national forest if they did. Either way, it's completely tragic. It's a terrifying situation that nobody wants to see. But there you have it. I received so many emails on this. People are like, Matt, what happened? Tell me. Did they shoot it down? Is our government attacking planes? Calm down. This happens, and it happens more frequently than you think. The family, obviously, it's a tragedy anytime anyone passes away. But this grandfather just lost 2 generations of his daughter and grandkid, and that's horrible. So that's the story. That's what happened. As far as I know, I'll kind of keep an eye on this thing. I'll see if anything else comes out. More than likely, like I said, they suffered from a lack of oxygen, passed out. All 4 were unresponsive. Nobody tried to land the plane by calling the air traffic control. Nobody reached out. Nobody was squawking. Nobody was talking. This is just an unfortunate accident, and it's horrible. So, folks, thanks for watching the Don't Unfriend Me show. I appreciate it. If you like today's show, do me a favor. Go over to thedumbshow.com, or you can follow us at thedumbshow.com and at The Dumb Show. If you would like to find us on social media, podcasts, etc., you can go pick up a hat, shirt, coffee mug, all that type of stuff over at thedumbshow.com, and 10% goes back to veterans. And also, we give you 10% off by using code DUM10. Thanks for watching. I'll be live tonight with Olivia, Leroy, Amy, and I, all on at 8 o'clock. Come see us. Thanks so much for watching. I will see you tomorrow or tonight.
I'm David Boreanaz with the Casta SEAL team, and we have an important message for returning vets.
We want you to know if you're struggling to cope, there's help, and it's just a phone call away.
The Veterans Crisis Line is staffed with experienced professionals who know your struggles.
There's no greater sacrifice in service to our country. We're able to enjoy our freedoms because of it.
Your service is important. You are important.
For vets and their families, the Veterans Crisis Line is here to help 24 hours a day. Please call